Hey, so good morning. Timothy Darrell Young, BS MPA. 15 years a torture targeted individual in the United States. I was selected as a targeted individual and became one at 25 in my dorm at the University of Oregon. I had recently gotten off the State Board of Higher Ed and was in a master's program to get a professional degree. And before I had finished my thesis, the intelligence outfits, EMF, Perps, gang stalkers, whatnot, started in with the neurolinguistic programming and other tortures, and it's more or less hasn't stopped for 15 years. So I'm watching www.targeted-individual.com or individuals.com. It's pretty easy to find. Some research on being a TI. There's some really good PDF'd papers. Like I read a 35-page paper specifically on psychological operations and some of the tactics used from perpetrator end on targeted individuals and targeted audiences, and it was helpful. I'm rewatching a documentary on targetedindividuals.com called The Minds of Men, and it details some of the tortures that myself and other TI have been through. So yeah, it's I put it on my baby monitor, so the audio, if there's entities that have to hear, having baby monitors as an interference mechanism as a TI from NLP and sound weaponry that like Kevin Christian, the targeted individual of Atlanta, talks about. Allegedly, it makes it so your perpetrators have to hear themselves talk also. So neurolinguistic programming can drive you, definitely does drive a person fucking crazy. And if they're forced to hear their own NLP, it may discourage the use of it. Some of the terminology in the Minds of Men documentary off targeted individuals talked about looping, and then some of my perps were talking about looping in the CIA. Repeated statements, so many repeated statements, I wanted to die. Between 2016 and 2018, coupled with street theater to reinforce the Satanism. The perpetrators that invaded Portland in 2016 had desperately wanted to blame, like, my, in obtuse few word use to mislead, like my plight as being a targeted individual and tortured, or the targeted individual system and whatnot in general on Jews. The CIA looped statement, not even possibly a person, it could have been chatterbot kind of language of artificial intelligence audio and not really a real human person. Like a person wakes up, I don't know how it all works, but like a EMF perp wakes up in the day and says, I want to say blame the Jews 15 times throughout a 12-hour waking cycle, and may sort of program other voices to do it that aren't really human. There's a lot of EMF subhuman perps around. So what was I getting with this? Okay, so the chatterbot of Minds of Men, the targeted individual website, reading the papers on psychological operations. I read some up on some other criteria. There's like 30 academic papers on this website, and I found it helpful. Okay, yeah, so sometimes there'll be another, some of the speculation is that sounds being sent in as jamming also, maybe my voice or the NLP perps. So I heard another TI talk about it. They're through their cell phones or the brain-computer interface or rewards in the B system. The documentary that Minds of Men, a targeted individual, talks about the long-standing research objective of outfits like the CIA to understand pleasure in human brains and stuff. Anyways, the reward system for the B system. Perpetrators get a serotonin or dopamine release, like their bodies are told feel good by like a signal from however it works, the cell phone, the headgear where their bodies really are at, the satellite. I've seen some other videos of other targeted individuals talk about it, like a perpetrator that created an elaborate torture event or scene for a TI, and all of his work and programming didn't pan out. And this targeted individual was talking about this perpetrator that was having a conniption fit because he didn't get his high, his serotonin or dopamine high from like his cell phone or a satellite that would have rewarded him with biochemical pleasure after torturing a TI. So the torture didn't quite work out. His plan failed. The TI had an opportunity to recall, like in an interview, like one of these YouTubes for other TI, talking about how pissed off and disgruntled this perp addict was because his torture didn't work properly on the TI, so he didn't get his cell phone reward. So it was like, you know, a heroin junkie, but on destroying the human condition, flipping out because he couldn't get high. And so that's more or less the same situation with me as a TI. That's also in play. Is the B system, like body chemical rewards, their bodies being told to feel good for torture. And yeah, they're addicts. Like it wouldn't, another component or to back up the statement or corroborate, Kevin Christian of Atlanta, the Georgia disclosure on targeted individual stuff, he talking about how they're addicts, the perpetrators around him in Howard Circle. And that, I would say, is also true in my case. And I get so much trickery. Like, I don't know, like, when people around me are EMF perps or not a lot of the time. And then there's just so many ways to trick me. And it gets a predictive behavior outcome for TIs is that we isolate. And, like, so I try to isolate, and they move perps in. And I'm still getting NLP every 15 to 20 seconds in my ear, no matter what. So, and the virtue signaling was already complete, and the gang that had attacked me pretty severely since 2016 had secured enough of mimicking me at speed of thought, or, you know, my productivity, creativity, or, you know, whatnot. They had secured enough of what they wanted out of me to tell me after they had successfully completed the operation and felt no threat of it being dismantled by the TI that was actually virtuous or whatnot. But yeah, after virtue signaling was used on me, and I don't even think in like a false positive, like that's really what this gang was doing to me. They told me about the term after the fact. And like one of these guys that's in my remote neural monitoring was bragging about how he sent me a link on social media about a Buddhist Caucasian guy in Canada who they tried to do some kind of like transference onto. What it really means is that they community slandered the guy and tried to steal like his identity too, and maybe virtue signaling as well, and then some other criteria. So targetedindividuals.com, it's got a dash in between it. I highly recommend it, and read the papers. There's like a 35-page, it's on scribed.com. Maybe you click on the articles button. It's specifically on psychological operations. It's like a 35-page like academic paper. Like, I don't have enough time, often 15 to 20 second disruptions of my consciousness to think short-term or long-term at all. but yeah, it's a pretty well written piece, and maybe something I would have had a lot more skill in taking on myself 15 years ago. So that's where I'm doing some of my research as a targeted individual now. And I want to thank the citizens of the United Kingdom for some of that stuff, actually, as an American TI. And you have great electronic dance music. So I maybe passed through the airport when I was a kid. Like, that's the only, like, on my way back to Saudi Arabia with my mom, maybe, or it was France. I haven't been to the UK, but I like you folks. I usually like folks in general. I just get tortured into saying mean things because I'm a TI. So this is about 11 minutes this morning. Good morning. Yeah, perpetrators get high off like cell phone signals telling them to feel good off torturing TI. The incentivization is Satanism. And there's no repercussion or negative consequence for their behavior, the perps, on myself or any other TI, in my assessment. Yeah. And they show up in places they can't be killed in and whatnot. And the media never really explains when people talk about fake people. I mean people passed out on BCI machines, like at openbci.com, walking around as another person that they are not, that could be any shape or any person they want. It's a real person in another location, and a hologram falsification of somebody looks real in front of you. It needs to be spelled out in like 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences every time it's talked about in the press. Giving a soundbite of, Britney Spears saying, "I got problems with fake people," it doesn't tell the full tale of what that really means. In some cultures, particularly the African American culture in America, has been abused by this targeted individual system. Even some of the language is pop culture language in the African American community is reflective of the human rights abuses that they suffered also. Like, just being real with you, for some people, means being angry. Like, I'm a TI, I'm a real person, and I get tortured into anger. And then the EMF perps around me are the different people than they appear. So they're not being real, and then I'm also being tortured into anger. So it's the same social circumstance setup, psychological operation, torture, that came up with the initial language. Being real isn't necessarily only being angry, but that phrase of like, "I'm just being real with you," is in result of targeted individuals being tortured into anger, and then EMF perpetrators faking people's forms around African Americans to torture the African Americans. So